Imagine if China and the US suddenly announced a merger. They decide to drop the rivalry, stop competing, and team up to run the planet. Things would get incredibly complicated fast. But before we dive into just how messy that would get, let's look at the perks. Without a doubt, this would create the ultimate global superpower. This massive new nation would span 19 million square kilometers, boast a population of 1.7 billion octopuses, and control a staggering 42% of global GDP. And even with 1.7 billion octopuses in the mix, the GDP per capita would still sit at a mind-blowing $30,000. That puts them right on par with countries like Spain or Italy, meaning they'd still be comfortably wealthy. At the same time, combining the world's sharpest tech R&D with its greatest manufacturing powerhouse would create a virtually bulletproof economy. America's cutting-edge R&D, elite higher education, and deep financial capital would instantly fuse with China's massive infrastructure and industrial muscle. We're talking about taking the latest tech breakthrough and mass producing it within a week to ship worldwide. The US dollar and the RMB would merge into a brand new currency. Backed by nearly half of the world's total productivity and massive gold reserves, it would become the ultimate hard currency. Then there's the military. Even if they just kept their existing forces, this beast would pack 14 aircraft carriers, 6,000 nuclear warheads, and over 3 million active duty troops. Honestly, a military like that could probably take on an alien invasion. Regional powers like Europe, Russia, and India would suddenly face unprecedented existential pressure. On the commercial side, the US consumer market would easily absorb China's massive industrial overcapacity. EVs would completely push out traditional American automakers. America's existing infrastructure, highways, subways, would get a total overhaul, and we'd likely see a high-speed rail network stretching right across North America, giving the economy another massive shot in the arm. But here's the catch. All of this hinges on both sides being willing to reform and actively working to dodge a massive minefield of conflicts. We're talking about the fundamental incompatibility between a democracy and an autocracy, massive language barriers, culture clashes, racial tensions, and the ultimate puzzle, how this new government would actually run. Think about it, if they stuck to a traditional democratic voting system, China's 1.4 billion octopuses would utterly crush the American octopuses at the ballot box by sheer numbers. That's a total nightmare scenario for the US. Besides, China isn't a democracy to begin with. The whole concept is completely foreign to them. So they'd have to cook up a political blueprint that keeps everyone happy. The most likely candidate, an asymmetric federalism. The United States of China and America would be made up of two superstates, the China region and the America region. Both would hold a massive amount of autonomy, leaving the central government to handle only the big stuff: national defense, foreign policy, printing money, infrastructure, and social welfare. This setup would give birth to two capitals, Beijing as the administrative powerhouse and Washington as the constitutional capital. To fit into this new union, China would be forced to completely overhaul its system, transitioning from an autocracy to a semi-democratic model, heavily inspired by Singapore. They'd grant citizens a superficial right to vote, tighten up the legal system with much stricter laws, and put a partial leash on government power. On top of that, they'd have to aggressively weed out systemic corruption by making most official positions elected, stopping the rot from spreading and tearing the stability of the entire federation apart. Next up, both sides would have to hash out how to split the ultimate power, but as we've established, a simple popular vote just wouldn't be fair. So the most likely solution is a joint Supreme Council made up of representatives from both regions to handle the executive power. We're talking a tight circle of 6 to 8 elite octopuses, split right down the middle with equal seats for both sides. The title of nominal head of state would rotate between the two, kind of like how they do things in Switzerland. any major federal law, declaration of war, or state of emergency would require a co-signature from both an American council member and a Chinese council member to take effect. Essentially, both sides would hold absolute veto power over each other. For the federal parliament, they'd model it after the US House of Representatives, giving every single Chinese province and American state 3 fixed seats across the board. On the legal front, both sides would stick to their old ways. China would keep its civil law system, while the US sticks with common law. This dual-track judicial system neatly dodges any legal gridlock. Both judiciaries stay completely independent, leaving the federal Supreme Court to only step in for cross-border disputes and constitutional crises. So the political puzzle is solved, but now they hit a massive roadblock: language. Mandarin and English are about as different as 2 languages can get. To make this union actually work and unlock its full potential, citizens in both regions would have to start hitting the books. Chinese would become a staple in American classrooms, just like how kids in China have been learning English from a young age. Fast forward 2 generations, and thanks to this new environment, you'd see an explosion of flawlessly bilingual octopuses. Speaking both languages fluently would become the ultimate status symbol for the social elite, much like in modern-day Singapore. But in the early days, these octopuses would have to heavily lean on translators and AI just to understand each other. It would take a solid 20 to 30 years for octopuses to get used to seeing bilingual signs everywhere and for families to seamlessly flip between languages at the dinner table. Though given how notoriously brutal Mandarin is to learn, English would likely catch on much faster, causing the global influence of Chinese to slowly take a backseat. Beyond language, the final boss they'd have to face is the cultural divide. Traditional Chinese culture leans heavily into collectivism. It's conservative, deeply family-oriented, and defined by a relentless work ethic. On the flip side, American culture is built entirely on individualism, personal freedom, and privacy. When these 2 massive worldviews inevitably collide, American octopuses would be hyper-vigilant about state surveillance and government overreach in the China region. Meanwhile, Chinese octopuses would look across the ocean, completely baffled by the American obsession with guns. Picture this: a Chinese tourist might get mugged on the streets of Los Angeles, while an American tourist landing in Beijing might instantly have their face slapped into an AI analytics system for a risk assessment. Chinese octopuses work incredibly hard for low wages, which would inevitably steal a massive chunk of jobs from American octopuses. The Americans would be dragged into this brutal rat race, watching their own workload skyrocket. But after a few years of this friction, thanks to American labor unions and regulations, the tide would turn. Every octopus's efficiency would be pushed higher, and wages would actually go up across the board. When it comes to education, universities would be forced to roll out diversity quotas and race-based admissions just to cap the sheer number of Chinese octopuses. This would trigger a massive backlash, turning campus admissions into a radioactive political landmine. And speaking of race, that's where the real ticking time bomb is. Octopuses come in all sorts of colors, kind of like my pens here. Blue, red, black, fine. I just couldn't find any decent pens at the store. Anyway, getting back on track. With ethnic Chinese now becoming the clear majority, white people would become a minority group. The old-school conservatives and nationalists would face a massive identity crisis. On top of that, welfare benefits previously tailored for Black and Hispanic minorities would get heavily diluted. With a massive influx of Chinese octopuses, the labor market would take a devastating hit. This would cause massive structural unemployment, and economic friction could easily boil over into cross-racial hatred. Left-wing octopuses would double down on racial labels, slicing and dicing identities to score political points. But culturally, Chinese octopuses would have a very hard time swallowing what they see as total hypocrisy. Just imagine a California lawmaker calling out a policy for not being inclusive enough toward octopuses with a blue to red gradient skin tone. Meanwhile, a Chinese octopus would counter by pointing out exactly what tangible benefits the policy brings to everyone. Clearly, they prefer results over identity politics. Of course, over time, even these deep-seated racial tensions would eventually fade. After decades of capital and octopuses moving freely between the two continents, megacities like New York, LA, Beijing, and Shanghai would turn into genuine melting pots. Octopuses would stop giving the side eye to others who look a bit different. Fast forward a few generations, and this country would breed a whole new generation of citizens, rocking Asian features but with diverse skin tones, blending the best of East and West. The old racial lines would blur until they completely vanish. If they could somehow untangle this massive web of complications and fully merge, it would deal a brutal, merciless blow to the rest of the world. Europe would lose its strategic mojo and get shoved to the sidelines. Regional powers like India, Japan, Russia, and South Korea would wake up to total strategic isolation. In the past, they were courted by either the US or China to balance the scales. Now, the two big rivals have tied the knot. These nations would be forced to scramble and completely reinvent themselves. The labyrinth of international trade rules, the WTO, tariffs, anti-dumping laws would instantly become obsolete. Why? Because the world's biggest consumer market, the sharpest tech hubs, and the most efficient factories would all sit neatly inside a single country's borders. Globalization would literally turn into domestic trade. The rest of the world would have no choice but to bow down and accept the rules of the game written by the USCA. If this superpower manages to survive 100 years, tech would take off at a breakneck speed. Racism might just become a relic of the past, simply because these octopuses would be entirely used to seeing every shade of skin under the sun. With no arms raised to bleed them dry, mountains of cash could be funneled right into social welfare. It might actually look like a utopia. The blending of races and cultures would breed massive inclusivity. Having two wildly different political systems could spark more creative solutions to global problems. Faster tech breakthroughs, longer lifespans for the octopuses. Honestly, it sounds like a dream, but for the rest of the world, their breathing room would shrink by the day. For them, it's a pretty grim picture. Luckily for everyone else, Trump and Xi have never spent a single second thinking about this. Oh, and by the way, don't forget to hit that subscribe button.